Welcome to episode 2 of the Takeoff. This is Max Henry. Wanted to say thank you for the great reception to the first episode. This is a new thing for me, and I appreciate you sticking with me, and I'm excited to be releasing weekly episodes, at least for the foreseeable future. So thanks for tuning in with Dom last week. Very excited for this week's episode. We have Wenxin Yang, who I've known for almost 15 years at this point. I originally met him when he was living in Michigan. He now lives in New York, where he is a jack of all trades when it comes to branded content. He's worked as a video director, producer, creative, editor, you name it, for brands like Nike, Crocs, and Gucci. And he's also done some really beautiful spec work for parkour branded content. And if you've not seen films that he's made, like Controlled Descent, which came out a couple of years ago, definitely check out his parkour specific work. Controlled Descent specifically is, I think, one of the most beautiful semi-narrative or artistic parkour pieces that has been made, period. Wenxin, from shooting and planning to color to editing and sound, is at the top of the game, along with people like Toby and Sasha. Maybe for me, the top of the game, especially when it comes to tying parkour and narrative into a more commercial space. So I was really excited to have him on the podcast and chat about what he's learned from working with some of the world's biggest brands, how he's been able to incorporate parkour into shoots. Recently, he did one, actually came out yesterday, for Kodak, which is fantastic, and where he still sees parkour can grow in terms of, what we communicate to the outside world and how we can make ourselves maybe a little bit more appetizing to brands that want to tell stories and incorporate an urban adventure sport like parkour, but don't really know how to get started. So thank you for joining me on episode 2. Without further ado, here is Wenxin Yang. Wenxin, welcome to the Takeoff. Thank you so much for being here, man.
Thank you for having me.
Any corrections? Did I get everything right?
No corrections at all. Just a lot of flattery that I'm not really used to.
Well, I had to make sure that with all those luxury brands, we got Crocs in there to keep it.
Crocs is really fun. I rank Crocs very highly as one of my favorite shoots I've done. So
yeah. Do you have a favorite non-parkour shoot that you've done?
Favorite non-parkour shoot? Let me think about that. You know what? I think my favorite shoots, I categorize it in two different ways. It's either it's a very fun concept and we got to have a really fun time on set, or it's a situation that's really interesting that it brought me into an interesting situation, like an event, and I wouldn't have been able to be in the room otherwise. So I think I split those two things in my brain. But I think my favorite, one of my favorite shoots that I've done recently was for a New York City based brand called Cody Phillips last year. And I got to do their fall winter campaign last year that did really, really well. It went pretty viral online. A lot of people liked it. It was just a really good combination of great concept from the photography, and the art director at the brand just brought me on kind of as a pinch hitter, so to speak, because the original plan kind of fell through and they were kind of scrambling to make something happen. And I feel like that's always a situation where I get brought in because I'm like a good last resort. Let's put it that way, where things aren't working out, the money is tight, and I can come in just by myself a lot of times and make some magic happen. So that was definitely one of those situations where the stars aligned and the magic did happen. So it was really cool.
Last resort for luxury brands, but first resort for parkour.
Yeah, definitely.
I think.
Yep, definitely.
Oh man, no, the Cody Phillips one was really cool, and I have loved that you've been shooting some spec stuff recently. It wasn't ASICs that you did, right? You did a Nike. It was spec
Nike
thing.
Yeah, Nike ACG. Yeah.
Okay, that one was very cool. I'll link that, but if for the listener who's not seen it, would you mind describing, I guess, where the concept came from and then what the process of executing that was like for you?
Sure. So I started making more spec work. And for people who don't know what a spec video is, it's essentially an example of an idea that you have. So no brand, no one is paying you money to make this thing. But you need a proof of concept. A lot of people, their imagination is really not very good. Like you really have to show them, like
It's
to.
wild
It is
in the
very
media
wild.
world.
Yeah, you're surprised how like limited imagination people who actually control wallets have. And so like it's good to show them like what you're trying to do, and it's usually like a lower budget thing. Maybe it could be something kind of like quick. And then the hope is that you either use that to get the job that you want, or at the very least it's in your portfolio and you can use it as reference for future things. So for me, shooting more spec video came about because I was doing so much of these paid brand shoots, and I kind of come in as almost like a hired gun. And yeah, like I feel like I tell my friends and I tell a lot of people I consider myself almost like a plumber, where there's a job to be done, and I come in and I get the job done, and it's I do it well, but that's about it. So because a lot of it can be sort of just fulfilling a role, it felt nice and important for me to do something creative, do something that actually aligns with the things I want to portray and or the jobs I want to get. So the spec work is a lot of it is around mixing some kind of short form, like social friendly video concept with parkour or just some kind of like city sport adventure sort of thing. Um, because I realized that my goal is always to try to push for more parkour related shoots on these brand campaigns. That's really important to me. I want to see the sport represented within the advertising space. Max, as you know, like you're probably the first person I've met that actually worked on a campaign for American Eagle as a model. I remember we talked about that a really long time ago, and that was before I
Yeah.
understood anything about anything. But
You would have
yeah,
loved to see how much money they blew on the most random stuff too. It was
I,
great. Just
I think
unlimited budget.
I have a much better idea, honestly, now of how the budget was used. But yeah, I think that like it's an untapped kind of, how do I say it? Like I don't want to call it like an activity, but like aesthetic, so to speak. The
Yeah.
way that like, go ahead. What were you gonna say?
Oh no, I was gonna ask you. So I guess for the listener, like there's some brands I think of like North Face. They just released a new, or maybe it's kind of like a sub brand, North Face City. It looks like they've been shooting a lot in New York, and they're Denver. I mean, they're based out of Denver, so I know a lot of folks who work for their media team. And that to me has always felt like such a home run combination of a brand that's rooted in adventure sports and outdoor exploration that's trying to urbanize. And it's like, why would you not? I mean, to me, the only two sports that feel relevant in that world, other than pickleball, maybe for pure popularity, right, would be like skateboarding and parkour. You know, those are the two sports I think that inherently like reimagine the city in a way that feels adventurous. But for a lot of other brands, I guess you've gotten to work with them and you've gotten to see what they get out of it. And I'm curious, I was going to ask you this way later in the podcast, but we're here now. So
Yeah,
I was
yeah,
going to ask you, what do you feel like parkour adds? Because it's not like we're necessarily bringing huge viewership as a community, right? It's not like North Face uses climbing a lot, for instance, because there's a massive climbing community and they're able to tap into the excitement of that as well as obviously use climbing as a vehicle to like demonstrate their product. But for parkour, something that I've always kind of struggled in articulating and digesting myself is like, I think the visuals are so powerful, but do you see that that's enough to overcome maybe the objections of other people who would say, you know, how's it different from running? Or, well, what does it really add to the shoot to have my jeans in a parkour commercial versus having somebody, you know, run down a subway platform in them?
yeah, yeah. Um, that's a great question. I have an answer for you, and I can tie that to the spec work question from earlier.
Thank God.
Yeah, there we go. We're doing the podcast narrative thread. But so I think like the sort of aha moment I had with the spec work is that I think the strength of parkour and parkour athletes is the like our ability to put our body within an unnatural space that you would otherwise not see a human being exist in. Like, you know, they're overlooked spaces, but like they're also inaccessible spaces to most humans, right?
Hmm.
So by that definition, even if you're not doing like a really crazy line, you occupying that space is could be really mind blowing to somebody else, right? And in a way, the less you do, the more of a mystery it is. And then the people can kind of fill in the imagination of like, oh, how do they get there? Why are they there? What are they doing? So for, let's say, the Nike ACG spec shoot that I did, it wasn't really a parkour piece. It was more of an urban climbing piece. There's a big wall in the north side of Manhattan that is a pretty easy, essentially like a free solo climb, maybe like 20, 30, 40 feet. I don't really remember. But um, I felt like what was the most interesting thing about that feature is that you can kind of see the city behind you, but you have me just on the wall. And I think that in and of itself is really interesting. And I can only get there as a parkour athlete. So I think that that is also just what parkour can bring to campaigns, brands, advertising generally, is that like rather than relying on VFX, or relying on maybe like having a lot of gear or like stunt coordination. I mean, I not to undervalue stunt coordination. I do think you need that for like legitimately big paid shoots. Like safety is important, but like you have a skilled person that can be in a space and be really comfortable and
Hmm.
kind of exude um like a vibe, a coolness, like if you want them to. And I think that that's what parkour can do versus almost everything else
Yeah.
is sort of like a street level thing.
No, it's a really good way to think of it because I think a lot of folks, when they think about parkour in a non parkour space, like branded pieces, they think about, I mean, Casino Royale is a film, so it's a little different, obviously, but they think about that essential concept, right? It's the chase scene. The movement is telling a really direct narrative. It's not so much a visual medium. And I think that your point that, especially short form branded content, so much of it is about letting the viewer kind of free associate abstract concepts with the
Mm,
visuals that are happening on the screen. It's like, why is that person weirdly floating in the air with no point of reference? Or why are they, up on the top of the scaffolding in these like designer pants or whatever it is?
right.
And I think that's something that I have never really been able to articulate. So that's really helpful. I'm
Yeah.
curious if have you been watching like Storer's recent
Yes.
promotional stuff? What do you think about all the? I mean, I think other than that, it's cool that they're experimenting with Super 8 and 16 mil and stuff. What have you thought about the sort of last year of their advertising?
Yeah. I think that it's really cool that they've put in a lot more effort into creating these ads for their own brand because the way that I see it is like, as again, it's like you're not going to get other work unless you show people. It's like I see those videos as a way to market their own brand, but it's also a way to probably get other branded campaigns outside of the parkour world. Um, I think that like their stuff is really incredible given that they have an output of a video every week and their team is big, but it's like not that big to be shooting campaigns and weekly uploads and filming and like all these and like putting on events. They're like putting on a
Yeah.
lot more events now compared to before too. So I think that's really cool. Um, I think that like there's still sort of like um a mystery to be cracked, which is what do most people think when they see like something like a store ad if they like didn't mean to encounter it. And I think that I'm
Hmm.
constantly trying to like get out of my own parkour brain to be like, okay, is this cool or is this really silly? Um, to people with no context. And then
Yeah.
it's like, what can you add or subtract to make it sort of broadly appealing while still maintaining a style and a vision? And I think that's really hard. And I think that's where our sport is just young compared to other action sports.
Do you feel like some of that is just where parkour is at in this sort of like cultural milieu, and in kind of like, right, like we're bathing in this soup of associations and like media that we all live in. So you look at something like climbing, and I think climbing or skateboarding are great examples because they have such strong cultures. And parkour, on the flip side, I think internally, right, we recognize that there is a very strong culture. Once you're part of the community, you can kind of point at all these things like, oh yeah, like there's a total sort of like visual language that we use. There's a really strong community. But from the outside, I don't think we've figured out how to portray that yet. And even in something that's more established like climbing, what it was 10 years ago versus what it is now communicates to a totally different audience. So, like a Patagonia ad 15 or 20 years ago probably had a very different audience than the Patagonia ad that's in like East Williamsburg now at the subway station, because they've expanded their brand to include all these new people that also have like then changed their mind. So I guess my kind of question for you is with Store specifically, right? When I go to the UK, I can't walk down the street in Brighton with Callum without somebody stopping us. Like literally every single street. It's insane, right?
That was my experience hanging out with them once too. It's like people will just yell store at them,
Yeah.
which is insane.
So I think to me it's like there's a level of like geo-specific cultural relevance. Like parkour means something very different in the cultural language in the UK versus here, where I look at a store ad and I think often the same things. Like, what can I learn from this for, like any point A stuff that I want to make, or just in general, how I talk to people about parkour. And it's almost hard because we're fighting such a different set of preconceptions across the pond here in the US. And I think you can still learn stuff, but I guess my question one is, do you think that has an impact? And then two, what maybe from your perspective, working with a lot of brands and kind of thinking about these things holistically in the media space, do you feel like we can still learn in parkour and short form content to do what you said, which is like find those abstract ideas that we want to communicate and then represent them to the outside world?
Yeah. I really like what you brought up earlier about how, because we're like a sport that's mostly existed on the internet, we're also bathing in associations and in like, being kind of,
we're bathing in the sweat of Michael Scott and Dwight Schrute's office parkour.
Oh my God.
Scene.
We will never
we're just
escape.
drowning in the sweat of Dwight
not
Schrute.
Even, I mean, I think in a way, like even beyond that, like, I guess like, I think that like parkour is a very specific case of a because the internet kind of sport. Like we have, for the most part, really been influenced and grown and benefited from the internet. But as we're like now, we're in like Web3, it's like we can't really pull ourselves out of how we're influenced by the internet. And like sort of like as culture and culture online and offline are all homogenizing and accelerating, I think that so too is parkour, in the sense of like there's a taking and a recycling of ideas where I don't feel like it gives the sport an opportunity to kind of figure out like what is it on its own. Because like when the internet doesn't exist and you have just people do an activity based on what actually like functions for them on a day-to-day basis. But like instead we function based off of trends and aesthetics. And
it's also, it's hard to build culture and community, right, when people are always looking at you. It's like being a 13-year-old.
Yeah, exactly.
Everything you're doing is exposed to the You can't experiment because everything is judged instantaneously on its, not even on its merit, but on its success online.
Right. And it's almost like I'm like thinking about it. It's like right now what parkour culture is like a hodgepodge of what parkour was 10, 15 years ago. CrossFit, climbing, uh, contemporary dance. You know, you have like a buff
Mhm.
parkour, an artsy parkour, and a sort of like a climbing sort of that kind of
I'd throw in the
parkour now.
punk like skate parkour too, all the beats.
Yeah,
Maybe it's just because I'm in Colorado, but
no, no, definitely. That's definitely a thing.
yeah.
I think punk parkour is more of a, honestly, like a Western thing. I think that in Asia, it's like, I don't even know if it's really that much, but, yeah. Okay. I'm trying to think. Where do we go back to
No, you're
where
good.
did
I
we
was
leave off?
asking if
Okay.
you, I think you kind of were addressing the first point, which is like the question of do you think that where the thing is happening, in specifically the case of store, where the thing is happening impacts how relevant it is. And I feel like you're
Hmm.
saying kind of yes, and you're also acknowledging to your point, right, that we live in a constant like digital ecosystem, so that's confusing. And then the second question was like, what do from your perspective, what do you think we still have to learn to communicate maybe the more abstract, gushy stuff that helps brand or helps activities succeed at communicating to the outside world through content that
Mm,
parkour is still struggling to find its feet on.
for sure. I think that like my personal opinion is, at least for myself, I've kind of approached it in a roundabout way where I do think a lot about how to communicate the sport better to people outside of the sport. But I think I also try to be someone who other people are willing to listen to about my abstract ideas. Because I think that communicating ideas and is so much based on trust. I think someone is willing to listen to you if they trust you and you have a relationship with them, and they're willing to, you know, hear you out on something that's a little bit more far out if you've kind of established that. So I think that within my profession and the work environments, I try to be very professional. I try to um, be a good spokesperson for the sport so that when I get the chance, I can essentially slide in and be like, hey, this is who I am. This is what I care about. Um, and maybe you're willing to hear me out and like maybe we can make something happen. Um,
Mm.
and I think that that maybe has always been sort of the Achilles heel of a lot of action sports is like we have that sort of like renegade punk nature, which makes us dislike the establishment, dislike bureaucracy, and you form up like systems and whatever. But I think that you can be one or the other. You can say, yeah, capitalism sucks, but you can also say like I can be professional, and then when I've tricked everyone, I can then slide in and tell them how like what I care about and like what I think is cool, and maybe they'll listen to me. And
Are you
that's
implying we
kind
need more normal adults in parkour to trick people into realizing normal adults do parkour?
yeah, 100%. I think that there's a lot of I think that there is a lot of
Can I still wear my Naruto
um,
headband to work or no? Do I have to get rid of that?
only if you slash it through the center to make sure that people know you're anti-establishment.
There you go.
But yeah, I think that like professionalism goes a long way, and that's just like that's not even like a sports parkour advice. I think that's just like a general advice that like I would give a lot of people even trying to aspire within like a production, creative, like freelance, whatever space. It's like I think that the longer I've been in this industry, the more I'm just surprised how little professionalism I see, and how like you you get to you get to keep doing the thing you're doing because like you just showed up and you were friendly and you like it's like easy to be around and you got the job done. And yeah, I don't know, I think that like uh there's somewhere in there is a lesson about like athletes, and then like kind of like slowly transitioning into being an
Hmm.
athlete plus something else. Cause I think all of us are going to have to be athlete plus something else, most likely.
Yeah, I get. Let me maybe extract a nugget from that, and you can see if you agree or disagree with it. So this is something I think about regularly, especially as I train all the time with Mel McQueen, and Christine and I and Mel talk all the time about how for so many years when I was younger, I kept waiting for something to happen that would make the adult who does CrossFit, the adult who climbs, the adult who, works in media also realize, oh, I can actually just pick up parkour too and have this as one of my hobbies. Because at least in America, right, that kind of normalization is what helps it sort of seep into, go from the office meme or the subculture to just not being mainstream, but becoming an accepted part of culture in a way that allows people who are into parkour to share that passion and make a living off of it if they want to do that. And then we kind of realized, and I think this is where we are now, that it took us long enough that we've just become those people. And so, I go to the playground with my almost 2-year old, and I used to say, man, someday I'm going to get to see some dad and convince them to do parkour. And it's like, no, wait, now I just have to be the dad that people like as a dad at the playground, who they then find out has a parkour set up in their yard. And that's what normalizes it for them. It's not necessarily always about going to people where they are. Sometimes it's about being the example.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, like, I think that's part of that's an almost an inevitable part of the growth curve of most sports. It seems like when you look at skating, skateboarding, or surfing or rock climbing, I think as so much of parkour has been accelerated because of the fact it grew up on the internet and the progression has happened on the internet, which has been exponential. But age is something that you can't accelerate through exposure on the internet. And I think aging into the sport for a lot of us who started in the kind of earlier times that you mentioned, uh, it's almost like, yeah, now we're the undercover agents that slowly you're like, oh yeah, I like to play D&D with my friends on Thursdays, and then on Friday I also like go to this parkour jam if you ever want to check that out. Like, it just becomes one of the weird hobbies that you have as an adult, um, which is really valuable, I think, at just making it feel more approachable,
Definitely.
especially when people, yeah, know you outside of the context as just the parkour guy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that like, I'm still trying to wrap my head around this, which is like, I'm trying to, I feel like the stance I'm in right now is, I think that parkour in the beginning, the community as a whole really tried to evangelize and be like, no, the sport can be for everybody. And I feel like I'm almost kind of like on the flip side, where I feel like I don't know if the sport is for everybody for like multiple reasons. And I feel like that's okay, because I think that rather than chasing growth of the sport, I mean, I think generally my philosophy towards life is that like, I don't think things are necessarily worth chasing, because I think that things that are meant to happen will happen. And that if you chase too hard towards it, you're kind of forcing something that's a little bit unnatural. And
Mm.
it's like, I kind of feel like it's almost like bad karma to try to force it that hard. Because there's gonna be some sort of like unforeseen like consequence. Like, for example, like, um, I don't think rock climbing chased like full mainstream adoption,
Clout,
but
you can say it. It's clout.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
clout. Yeah, I don't think rock climbing chased clout, but because it is more mainstream now, there is sort of this uh funny thing happening within the sport where it's like, um there's a lot of very average, like everyday person that partake in rock climbing, and it's a big section of the sport doesn't have sort of like the edge that it has.
Hmm.
And within the sport, it's sort of like kind of separating into like groups of like, are you like are you constantly dirtbagging and you just climb outside versus like you're very vanilla and you just climb indoors and you're constantly at the risk of breaking your ankles and wrist because you don't know how to fall. And
Yeah.
that's like the two end of the spectrum. And I feel like with parkour, a part of me selfishly wants to retain the rawness of it, and kind of what
Do you
makes a
feel like we
sport.
still have that rawness? Or do you feel like
I think we do. I think we do because, okay, let me think about that. Let me think about that. Um, I think we still do because I think that at its core, doing parkour outside is extremely weird and very awkward, and you have to be a very specific kind of person to be down to do that. And that in of itself keeps the sport a little bit weird and counterculture. I think that if we ended up having a lot of indoor facilities like rock climbing gyms, then I think that's when the shift within parkour will happen, where you just have only mostly like if the sport was like 50% gym rats, I think then we can revisit this conversation and like see where we're at.
so this ties into my next question because I think in America it feels particularly relevant since we have such a strong gym community. I mean, I would say that the US has pretty much always been the leader in gym development and programming for the global parkour scene. I don't know how many gyms there are. When I did a census or an audit a couple of years ago, we had almost 100 gyms that were just parkour specific across the United States, which is
Mm.
wild when you think about most communities that those cities are in. You hold a jam and you get maybe 30 to 50 people, and each of those gyms, you're talking probably an average of 150 to 200 people enrolled. Probably most of those are kids. And to me, that always raises the question of, okay, well, when all those 8-year-olds who are enrolled in gym parkour are 18, what does the sport look like here in 10 years, to your point? But one thing I wanted to ask you from kind of your perspective as a storyteller and I think a connoisseur of parkour media, we talk a lot about 10 to 20 years ago. I mean, you started, what, like 2008?
Yeah, 2007. So I just hit
2007?
18 years. Yeah, like
Yeah,
as of like last month, pretty much.
nice. Yes,
Yeah.
so almost exactly the same amount of time that we've been training. And I guess what were some of the formative or informative pieces of parkour media that shaped the way that you saw the culture back then, when I think a lot of people who've been in the scene like us for almost 20 years talk about it being maybe a little bit stronger, more coherent? And how do you think that the visual storytelling in parkour or just the media that we're creating has changed since then?
Yeah, that's a great question. The I think the most formative thing of how I perceive parkour culture was the YouTube, which is how I found it. And then it was the obviously like the illegal uploads of the documentaries, Jump London,
Mm,
um, Jump England. I think Jump England was also on YouTube at some point, or like Daily Motion. It was on
Jump
Daily
Britain.
Motion.
Yeah.
Jump Britain, sorry,
And
Jump
Google
England.
and pre-YouTube Google videos. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So that was very formative, but also I think that like a lot of us lived on the American parkour forums. I think the forums was super amazing for what it was at the time. Um, and I'm very sad that we don't have forums anymore. And I mean, I think what this was Web 2, and
Mhm.
I'm bringing up the Web 2, Web 3 thing because like we're kind of like we have three distinct phases of the internet now that are all culturally very different. And I think that like that is actually an important way to look at parkour itself.
Yeah.
But
Web 2
web
being that information is centralized under a few distributors like YouTube, Google. Web 3 being decentralized, more creator ownership led content distribution. As a quick and dirty explanation for the listener.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. But I think that like early Web 2, it was when a bunch of random, I mean, like Web 1 was when when the internet felt very vast, right? And like you could actually end up on a part of the internet that like just felt exciting and like strange, maybe a little scary, but like it was just like interesting. It was very vibrant and people were finding like each other online. And Web 2, when it first formed, which is like early Facebook, MySpace, YouTube, AOL, that kind of stuff. It's like, it still retained that energy of like the excitement of people finding each other, like people discovering interesting things and like forming online communities and actual people talking to people on the internet versus like not knowing if it's just a bunch of bots talking to each other now. But I think that like the American parkour forums back then was a super important, like for me, it's a super important part of how I experienced culture back then. Because I mean, when we both started, there wasn't that many people that did parkour. And if you train outdoors, you literally looked insane. And when someone asked,
and we all have weird nicknames too.
Yeah, exactly. I didn't go by my nickname. People gave me a nickname, but I never went by it. But you tell them that you're, I know, right? That's how little small of a community I was growing up in. But you would tell them what parkour was and no one would know. And I think at the time I felt so sad because I was like so desperate to find other people to train with. And that's what the forums did is help. It would help me find people to like that also did parkour. But I do look back at that time with a lot of fondness in the sense of like, oh yeah, like, it felt really good to be such an early adopter of like a cultural movement. And there was a really fresh energy to it versus now I think that a lot of people, when they see parkour on social media, they have a preconceived notion of it. And then it's now your job to combat that rather than to like be the first person to introduce someone to it. But yeah, I don't know. It was just really, really cool. And again, I'm losing track
You're
of
good.
the original question.
I'll give you my concrete question that kind of goes into that. So I was saying, what were some formative videos? Maybe give me 2 or 3
Okay.
formative videos for you that helped create that, whatever your picture is in your head of kind of this is the epitome of parkour culture then versus now. What videos would you say shaped that?
Okay. Oh my God. I know exactly the video I saw that got me into parkour, and I am literally forgetting the name of it right now. It's a Yamakasi.
Describe it. Describe it.
Oh my God. There's a moment in the middle of the video where someone does a human flag. And
you described every video from 2007.
I know, but like this is this is like 2006. Oh, I can't believe I don't remember.
Is it the Majestic Force video?
It's before that. It's before Majestic Force. It's
not the film Generation Yamakasi.
No, I'm on my computer looking for it, and I am not gonna find it.
That's okay. So we got a Yamakasi video. We've got American Parkour forums.
Yeah, and then I think a lot of the parkour generation's early videos was very formative to me because that was sort of like the zeitgeist of the sport at the time, which is like the very martial arts side of the sport. I really resonated with that, and that's why I gravitated towards parkour, because I did martial arts all my life, and I understood it from the lens of it being a practice. And I understood watching these videos a framework for how to learn, because I was like, oh, it's just repetitive practice. You throw a gazillion punches, you punch better. You jump a gazillion times, you jump better. Like I understood that. And so that's how I sort of self-taught the sport. I don't know how many times I've told people, but like I am entirely self-taught because no gyms existed back then, and there was no tutorials. And through the American Parkour,
oh no, there was an Urban Free Flow. They had the Kong tutorial where it was just the same angle at different speeds of someone doing a Kong.
Yes,
that one
exactly. Yeah,
28 seconds of gold.
And you know what? I milked those 28 seconds for a long time because I couldn't figure it out. It was like, yeah, the urban free flow tutorials and then like the American parkour PDFs because the
Mhm.
actual video DVDs was essentially a paywall that me being 12, I couldn't afford. So yeah, I was like learning from PDFs, but I was like, okay, I like this is the body position. I think like I could figure it out. But I think that I'm sure a lot of people will give this answer from like our like generation of practitioner, which is like out of time. Oleg's
Mhm.
out of time is, I mean, like that is the most representative piece of media for how I felt like parkour could be at the time, which is unbelievable athleticism, a sort of like fun and rhythm that was actually very underexplored at the time because he was also a dancer. And then just like lifestyle, like the friendship, and all of those things. I think it was wrapped up in like a very neat package of like like truly like a cultural artifact
Yeah.
that I think a lot
I
of people are still trying to replicate today.
I 100%. So I was just gonna say, so it's interesting to me. I also was incredibly nerdy and going down a sort of martial arts philosophical movement adjacent pathway when I found parkour. I've not met many people who I would say were in a similar spot at that age. I was 14 when I started,
Mm.
so I'm a couple years older than you. Um, but that's so fascinating. So if we go from there, right, you're talking American parkour forums, and I regularly feel like, I mean, one of the reasons I decided to start a podcast, other than that I'm a white man in my 30s with a kid, so it felt necessary,
Classic.
is that I miss having a place to discuss ideas, right? Because there were so many, I mean, forums were just open sounding boards, and you can have those kinds of conversations on YouTube, but parkour media has moved so much away from exploring what it means to do the sport to exploring, how well you can do the sport. And I think that's a pretty interesting shift that has had some maybe cultural ramifications for how accessible it feels and what the actual practice feels like to a lot of people. But before getting sidetracked, I wanted to ask you, so from those sort of iconic pieces out of time, what do you look at now as being representative to you of where parkour culture is at in a visual sense?
In a visual sense, I mean, I have to shout out the guys at the Commons. Uh, I think that they have almost single-handedly coalesced and put um, a style under the umbrella of like American postmodern punk athletic like DIY like all these
Mm-hmm.
things. I think that that is such a amazing thing that they've kind of like captured and kind of also fostered the growth of. Um, I think that again, because we're in a different age of the internet now, I think there is something extremely valuable about the DIY nature of all action sports. And that
Mm-hmm.
like in a way I see a lot of value in the the encouragement of people doing things for themselves. And regardless of what your circumstance is, like how much time you have, how much money you have access to, whatever, just going out and like showcasing and like representing yourself, I think that's super important because like media unfortunately kind of incentivizes people to be like unreal.
Yeah.
Um and so I think that like parkour that is such a cool part of parkour media is like it is so real because you can't lie with like your body and movement. It's like you can lie with editing, but then if you see like how they train, it's like, oh, this is who they are. You know,
Mm-hmm.
you can't even move asynchronous to your own style. If you think about it, it's like you can like me. I'm not much of a tricker. And if I try to
Mm-hmm.
put out like something with more tricking and flow, it's just going to look clumsy. and I can work on myself in that way, but like I think that the truest video I can make for myself is something that my body is suited to doing in that moment, which is at the end of the day just expressing yourself honestly. So yeah, I
Love
think
it.
that's really
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. I think Commons and Capstone to me stand out as being sort of where the action edit kind of visual line is for first parkour storytelling right now.
Yeah.
Um, at least in that genre. So is there anything that you want to see more of in parkour from either from like a training and community perspective or from like an editing, filmmaking, visual perspective?
Yeah. So there is this guy that I met who is an aggressive inline skater that's in Columbus, Ohio. Um, and I met him randomly because we were training and he happened to be there. And I was like, oh, I like started a conversation with him and turned out that he was a parkour fan. Like, but he was
Very
also
cool.
a pretty well known aggressive inline skater. Um, his name, I will actually name drop him because he's a
Do it.
legend. Um, whoa. I hate that I'm forgetting his last name. So, oh my
We're
God.
gonna reveal your Google search screen, which is gonna
Yeah.
be the dude's first name and then aggressive inline
Yeah.
Columbus, Ohio.
You know, I'm like forgetting if it's Stefan or Stefan, but Stefan Brando, aggressive
Okay.
inline skater. I can link you his page later because he's awesome. But yeah, like we
We'll
were
drop his
talking,
profile.
yeah, and he said he watches store videos and like he's like kind of an OG in aggressive inline. And he told me the story about the development and the progression of that sport, which is what I felt like was almost like a cautionary tale to parkour itself. Where he talked about how like 20 years ago, so like early 2000s, the standard for this sport and like the standard of excellence and like sort of what was cool was doing the biggest trick possible, big jumps,
Mm-hmm.
big sends, and all of that. And there was, sort of like a tier of pros that actually made money from skating and had um, skate brand deals and video parts and all these things. But he said what kind of ended up happening was because that was sort of the standard of excellence. A lot of what was being put out and what was being celebrated within the aggressive inline culture itself is the big tricks. So that's all people were showing. But it turned out that that was deeply unrelatable to everyday people because they would see it and be like, wow, that's really impressive. I'm never going to be able to do that. So the sport itself didn't grow.
Mm.
And so what ended up was like, because less people were joining the sport, less people were spending money on skates and gear and wheels and all those things. So then the money dried up for the pros and they're doing these big tricks. So they're putting their body on the line. They're getting hurt. It's like not sustainable. And so you just see this like diminishing of the sport and an exodus of the pros where
Mm-hmm.
they just couldn't sustain themselves anymore. They couldn't make money from being a pro. So they just kind of stopped and, they were hurt and like all these things. So the sport itself experienced sort of a dark age. And he said what allowed them to kind of come out of the other end was that the standard of excellence and what was celebrated changed, which is that they started really, uh, people really found like a voice and a style in doing technical things, smaller things that were interesting, being able to film it well in a way that like to non-skaters, it was cool, but still seemed a little approachable, which is like, oh, like I can do that. Like I think that like this could be something that I could try. And kind of going back full circle, it had been like probably more than a decade later. And then the pros back then who are much older now, then kind of are rediscovering the sport. I think this is the part that I really think about is they are rediscovering the new era of the sport as an older athlete and being like, oh, this is what skating is like now. There's all these different tricks. Like let me essentially teach myself how to skate again. And Stefan said that there was a bunch of like really cool YouTube channels where it was older skaters sharing their journey of learning to be a skater again. And I think like that is sort of what I would love to see more in parkour media, which is the process of learning, like something that's not crazy. And like,
Yeah.
I think that like being a high level athlete is really remarkable, but deeply unrelatable.
Mm.
But being relatable is something that everyone can do because there's something that everyone isn't good at. And I think it's important to show people like how fun it is to try something new and to not be good at it because like, there's
Yeah.
like,
You want to
I
give
think that,
permission to people to be unremarkable and to try.
right, exactly. And I think that like, if what we care about is views, clicks, growth, and like all that within the sport, you can literally still do that by being bad. You just
Yeah.
have to share your
Many
process.
American athletes have, in fact.
Yeah,
I'm
exactly.
not going to drop any names, but
Yeah, I think like rather than seeing how well you can land trip cork, I would love to see the athlete who can land trip cork try to do like share the process of them doing like a turn vault at height or something. Just being like, oh, this is really scary to me. Like, let me work through this, like that kind of stuff. Um,
Mhm.
what is the name of the two girls in Origins that try moves that they see online?
Parkourism board. That's
Parkourism.
Steph and Brenda. Yeah.
Yeah, they're amazing. I think parkourism board is something that everyone should learn from because it's like, yeah, like all of us train all the time, and I think that there's a lot of value in trying new things rather than just hucking the same flips and same movements over and over again.
But
Which is
listen,
actually
I don't
how I
want to
train.
learn Cork Zero, dude. I don't want to learn how to back three.
But you might
Well,
have more
so
fun.
grabs.
You might actually have more fun if you do. That's the thing. It's like we think it's gonna just suck and be hard, but I think that it can also be
Well,
really fun. What is it?
that's a great point.
I think someone that has been in the parkour community in like Boston a really long time told me their first sort of stories of when they encountered Alfred Scott, where they said that Alfred was just slamming and sucking for like a really long time, but he kept trying these things that he couldn't do, and at some point he just worked through it and then got better at it. And I feel like I think about that all the time. We're like, we don't let ourselves just slam and suck enough,
Yeah.
And I think that like if we did and we allowed ourselves to be okay with not landing things, then we would actually have a lot more fun because it's like it's
Yeah.
stimulating. It's like something new. So yeah.
Yes. I'm going to summarize that and you can tell me if you agree or disagree. But I think that the takeaway I got from your story is that, the key to building a healthy long-term community, right, is you need to feed the roots more than the fruit. Like you can't have
Yes.
fruit that grows so fast that it pulls the tree down. And a lot of times in parkour media, right, we're showing the fruit, we're showing the highlights, we're not showing the fails. Actually, Dom is the first person that I had a conversation with for this podcast. One of the reasons being, I think he does what you're saying incredibly well, especially now he's highlighting kind of his return to injury or return from injury. And he has this joy doing a 360 precision on curbs. And that he's also done some of the gnarliest challenges in the sport and also had the gnarliest fails in the sport. And so he really has embodied like the full spectrum. I think that's part of what makes him such a compelling athlete for so many people to follow. But in general, yeah, I think that your point of not being afraid to show the bumps along the way, like a lot of times that's what actually makes the story compelling and what makes it relatable to somebody, even in the sport, but especially outside of the sport, and gives them permission to try, because nobody looks at parkour, I think, and says, I'm going to succeed at this right off the bat.
Yeah.
Right? They need to feel safe that they're not alone failing the first couple times they go out. And, it took me a month to learn how to Kong vault, right? Like back
Same.
in when we did it, that was totally normal, and there was no standard of kind of comparison or
Yeah.
expectation that you'd learn it on your first day. And in some sense, it seems like I'm getting from you that it would be good for the community to at least tap back into that permission structure.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I think it was like I think it was a really beautiful time to grow up in the sport and not have all of these insane feats that has happened since then. Um, I
Yeah,
think, yeah, I don't know. It's like I I'm
no one
so
was
in
looking at roof gaps thinking I'm going to cork that in
no,
2007.
definitely not. And it's been really cool to hear the joke movements become literally reality. And then a layer beneath that become a reality for athletes that have only been training for like a year or two. And I'm like,
Hmm.
the progression is like so mind blowing. Um, and yeah, like I just wish that, we kind of tapped into the fun of it, I guess.
Yeah,
There's a level of seriousness and perfectionism in parkour that like I really would like to see be different. Like I think I tell people, and I'm guilty of this myself too, where like we all need to like smile a little bit more when we don't do something well. Just be like, okay, that was okay, and just be like, yeah, I'll just try again, rather than like calling yourself stupid and then like scowling the entire way through a challenge. So, yeah,
that's a great point, and I love that. I think that's awesome, and we went so far. I think we were in the direction of everything is great, and we went so far in the direction of taking ourselves seriously, and now we need to do a little course correction, maybe back away
yeah,
from that.
yeah.
Well, I did want to ask you just that we have kind of a specific takeaway when you look at everything that you've learned from working in media over the last couple of years. If you had one suggestion to give to a parkour filmmaker or editor, or just a random person who films their content and shares it online from what you've learned, what would it be?
Um, I think that the thing I would tell them is I think that every single person that is creative inherently within them, the most, let me try to rephrase this. Um, the, the most honest and the most interesting thing already exists within you if you're like past the age of 18. And I say this because I think that when we're younger, because developmentally we're just not like we haven't experienced that much life, like we haven't fully formed yet. We do what most likely feels best to us, and we do the things that feel like is the most honest to us. And I think that like as we get older and we become adults and like blah blah blah, there's a lot of things that start clouding that clarity. um so I think that as a parkour filmmaker, if you're past a certain age, your kind of goal is to start peeling back the layers and trying to figure out like what that like honest representation of yourself is, and then present that in the honest way possible to other people. Because if you're presenting yourself honestly, then that is also the most different thing that you could make that will help you stand out versus everybody else, because no one has lived your life. Um, and I think that that's like a journey that I'm on currently, because I am in the middle of making my essentially follow up project to Controlled Descent. It's taken me a very long time. It's taken me a lot longer than I thought it would. But I think that I've been ruminating for the past few years on what a follow up could be. And I think the main thing I learned from making Controlled Descent is that if it's right and it makes sense, you will feel artistically things start clicking into place. Because, and at least for me, that makes sense because it means that like I like to explore like myself, like my experiences within my work. And if I'm not representing myself honestly, then things don't click into place because I'm not actually looking into myself like with a clear set of like eyes. But then when I'm starting to see things clearly, things will naturally click into place because it is who I am and I make sense. Like that's so weird to say, but like I really believe that. So I feel like I can say I'm in that part of creating my next project because things are starting to make sense. And then
Yeah,
I'm
it's like
in,
you're cleaning your internal lens. When your
yeah,
internal lens is dusty, you're gonna have trouble getting clarity on how to externalize that. So you need to
definitely.
be able to work that both directions. That makes
Definitely.
sense.
But yeah, I think that like what's felt really fun is that like it took me so long to finally get back to like revisiting what I enjoy and how all the different things that I enjoy inform who I am as an athlete and also as a creative person. Like more than I think I could ever realize, anyone could ever realize. It's like the mundane little things that like maybe brought you joy when you were 7 or 6 years old probably matters to you as an athlete. I mean, even if you don't think it matters. And I guess like I can give like an example of that where, I loved like American style comics growing up. So like Calvin and Hobbes, Garfield, The Far Side. Big part of me growing up. I used to draw my own comics. But I guess like what's important about that is I followed the schedule of an actual syndicated comic artist. So I would draw a panel a day. Like I would take time during the school day to draw it. And if I didn't finish it, I would draw it at home. And then like on a Sunday, I would draw a full Sunday spread. So like more than a 3-panel comic. But like that's what I enjoyed and that's what I liked. And I was like thinking about that all over again. And I was like, okay, what does that say about me? And I was like, I think what that says about me is that I, I like structure to a degree. I like to entertain to a degree. And I think that there's something about like a 3-part structure to a story that I also like naturally gravitate towards because I spent so many years making 3-panel comics. So it's, it would be setup, twist, punchline or setup, punchline, twist. And I think that like that's ingrained into me. So it's important to kind of dig at that a little bit more to see, okay, how does that actually affect me as an athlete? Do I create lines in 3-part structures? Should I make videos that follow a certain structure? And I think all of those, like, if you can just like, dig a little bit more, I think then at the core is the thing that's really interesting. And so I think that like everyone should try to do that exercise of sitting down and being like, what did I used to do that I haven't done in like a really long time? How could that be related to the thing I'm trying to create today? And I think if you spend enough time doing it, then you'll like make something really cool.
That's beautiful. It'll also keep you from scrolling social media, which is what many of us tend to do in our off time and generally didn't do at age 7.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. It doesn't keep me from not scrolling on social media. But I think that every time I stop scrolling, I usually I have a great time. I can show you right here. I just bought a brick. You know what brick is? Yeah, exactly. I have not installed the app yet. That just came in the mail like 2 days ago, but like this is my effort to try to get off the phone a little bit. So
nice.
Yeah.
Nice. Have a kid, it takes you off your phone really well because
I'm sure
anytime she sees you on your phone, she is like, I want to look at pictures of myself. So then okay, less on my phone. What you said just reminded me. I mean that was awesome, and I know that you got to get going soon anyway.
I'm actually okay. Like we can go until 6 if you want. I'm chilling. So
cool.
Yeah, it's up to you.
Great to know. I'll let you know if I have any more. I mean, one thing that immediately came to mind is I remember chatting with Nico Van Hull about line building and what you were saying about the 3-part structure and how to incorporate that kind of internalized lesson into your movement. Something that he told me he actively does is that in every line or every training session, when he puts together a line or a challenge, he always wants to have a surprise. And when you
Yes.
watch a Nico video, I think that comes across so powerfully. And it's one of the reasons why he's probably my favorite parkour athlete ever. And it's just every single clip, there's something that makes you go, how did he think of that? Oh, no way. I can't believe he went that direction. Right. And I think that came from investigating what gave him joy about parkour in the same way that you're talking about investigating what captured your interest when you were younger. It was like, is it always the same process? Is it the process? Is it something about the practice itself? Or is it just actually the novelty of adding a surprise or sometimes looking for the surprise, right?
Yeah,
That can kind of get you to that place of joy.
for sure.
My last question for you was going to be I would assume have kind of a very widespread content or media consumption library would be my assumption.
Sure.
I don't know if do you have any recommendations for people maybe in the parkour space, in the parkour media space specifically, for a channel that you follow, a creator, a book or a film that you would recommend? Just
Yeah.
one that you really feel like has
Yes.
been impactful.
Oh my God. I'm so happy you asked me this question because I get to put this one YouTube channel on that I really hope everyone checks out.
All
There's this,
117 listeners are going to be clicking through.
I really hope all 117 people go and watch this dude's YouTube videos. This YouTube channel is called Emp Lemon.
Okay.
Okay.
EMP.
EMPLEMON. He makes YouTube video essays, but his background is that he used to make YouTube poops. Hear me out. Don't close the podcast. Hear me out. This guy makes the most interesting YouTube video essays because he has honed an editing style from essentially dodging copyright law. Because YouTube hated YouTube poop. And for people that don't know what YouTube poop is, which is very normal, it's like in the early days of YouTube, basically it's like the predecessor to deep fried memes. Like you would use copyrighted content and like you would disassemble and reassemble it into something that's it's supposed to be funny, but it's like very abstract and the way that a deep fried meme would be today. And he's made a video series on this like a while back where he talked about his disdain for copyright law and like all these different things.
Very parkour.
Yeah, exactly. Where he, has essentially figured out how to make really cool videos. Now, because his style was informed by a need back then, and it's like wholly different than almost anything else I see on YouTube. But I think what I like the most is that he then takes this editing style and apply it to just talking about things that are very abstract that he himself is interested in. And tying this back to what I said earlier about how like the most interesting things are like what you enjoyed back then. Even though the things that he enjoys are random, there is a thematic kind of line that kind of appears through all the different things he talks about, whether it's NASCAR or SpongeBob or McDonald's or like The Sopranos, like poker, whatever. It's like all these things end up having a through line because that is what he is. And like I sat down and I watched a 40-minute video about a tornado in Oklahoma. And it was one of the most fascinating things I've ever watched, like ever. So,
strong recommendation.
Emp Lemon. I am so serious. If I were to recommend,
at least one of 117 will go and watch Emp Lemon later.
I'm going to recommend one specific video. I think if anyone were to start and watch one of these, I think everyone should watch this video called Art of the Choke. It is a 51-minute video where he talks about the worst chokes in sporting history ranked on a scale of 7. So he reappropriates like the nuclear disaster, like disaster scale of like how bad a nuclear
Got
disaster
it.
could be, and then takes it into how bad a choke can be on a scale of 7. And
Is
it's
Team
like,
Champions skill performance from last year included?
you know what? It may be a little bit outside of the scale, but it could be there. It could
Could
be
be
there.
there.
Yeah. But yeah, Art of the Choke, great video. I think that's where people should start.
Thank you. So that's a great recommendation. I feel like that's a great place to end it. Wenson, thank you so much, man, for coming on and sharing so many lovely perspectives. This was honestly really refreshing for me to hear somebody else just nerd out on both media and parkour in
Yeah,
a very thoughtful way.
for
So
sure. Thank you for having
really
me.
appreciate it. I told you you were not going to be disappointed. Wenson is one of my favorite people to talk to. I had way too much fun in that conversation, and I just love his perspective and the attention to detail that he brings to every project, whether it's something like Controlled Descent or the new project that he's working on that I'm very excited to see, or branded content, or even just how he thinks about the way that visuals are interpreted by different people with different backgrounds. I think that bit about exploring what it means to tap into your sort of most innocent, open self, your most authentic self that he was talking about is going to stick with me for a while. I think that my 7-year-old self was addicted to dinosaur nerdery, so I feel like I've carried that pretty well into parkour, and maybe this is me being my most authentic self. It's like instead of memorizing the Latin names of dinosaurs, I can tell you every YouTube video that had an impact on parkour from 2006 to 2026. But, different strokes for different folks. Next week, we've got another amazing guest. We're carrying out the sort of artistic tradition with Lilu Rel, who I'm very excited for you to hear from. It was a great conversation. I'm editing it now, and I'm going to keep trying to drop these weekly for you. We've got a couple more fantastic guests that have already been lined up. So stick with it. And as always, let me know what you thought. Let me know if you have any suggestions. And I appreciate you taking the time to listen.